Hello, everyone. I had an epiphany just a little bit ago, and I realized that I have some past experience that I haven't really discussed on this channel that might be interesting to some people. Quick personal update: things are quite crazy here. It looks like I'm gonna be out of work for the next couple weeks, and it's unpaid. So basically, I'm kind of just hunkered up in here, trying to be frugal with my spending. And usually I don't really have much of an issue with that. I've been able to save money consistently each month for the last like year and a half since I moved here. So I'm not terribly worried financially. But it's quite strange to have like your whole routine's gone when you don't work. Um, I don't know. I've been playing lots of just old Final Fantasy games, which makes me question like what am I doing with my life. But for when I do go outside to procure food and alcohol, I do have a little mask, so I should be safe. I don't know if this one. I don't know. People say, "Oh, masks don't do anything." Everybody else is wearing like the surgical flu masks. This is a reusable one. The box says it's antiviral. It's like an anti-pollution mask. It has like a little pocket, and you can like change out the filter. But I have like a limited number of them, so I'm probably not switching them out as often as I should. Maybe people do it like every single time. There could be coronavirus actually on this right now. I could be negating any protection it has just by playing with it on camera right now. But I got this for Christmas. I got a little box of Christmas presents from my family, and when I got this, I thought like, oh, that's a really that's a really cute thought. I didn't. I thought like this is a neat idea, but I don't really intend on using this. I don't really care that much about pollution or whatever. I just don't see myself using it. But then this happened, so it feels like destiny. It feels like I'm destined to use this. So this is what I got. Finding like regular flu masks is like impossible here. Every day there's like massive lines in front of some specific stores, and it clogs up the sidewalk, and it's just like stupid. I am seeing in the past day or so, it's less rare to see a person not wearing a flu mask, but it is fucking weird to see like literally every single person has a flu mask on. So I don't know. It's all kind of fucked. Anyway, the point of this video is that there's a point that I make very, very often, which has to do with the way that words work, right? And my major contention is that the meaning of a particular instance of a word is, in fact, determined by the user. And some people hear this and they think, yeah, of course, and it's not even controversial. Other people think that's a really weirdly specific thing to say, and then other people like hate that. They think that's like subjectivist, like postmodern fucking garbage or whatever. Like they hate it. So I get all kinds of responses to that, but I still think it's incredibly important. And I've mentioned this a number of times. But what I want to do is kind of recontextualize it in a way that I think will make a little bit more sense to maybe win over some of those people who really, really hate that idea. So the past experience that I alluded to earlier is I used to coach part-time debate and speech for a high school. And quick side note, man, starting up a program like that, if you want to start up a program, like you need to find someone who's experienced. I think that school tried to kind of have their cake and eat it too, in that they weren't sure if they had enough students with interest to be able to start up a program like that. But if you're going to start something, like you want to invest, you want to make that investment so that you can make sure it works. It's kind of like starting a fire, right? Like it's kind of difficult to start a fire, especially if you've never done it. Whereas if like you have someone start a fire and then you show up later and then they show you here, like put this on, do that, here's how I started it, like you have someone to teach you, then like you're able to go and make fires later, right? That's not the greatest analogy because starting a fire is fucking simple, but the point is like I've seen when I did debate, speech, mock trial, where you had somebody that was like an assistant to the coach, and then later on they go on and start their own program. And I think that's a really, really important step. So regardless, though, the style of debate that I had experienced the most with was called Lincoln Douglas debate. I had no experience with policy debate, no experience with classic debate, no experience with they had like public forum was another one, which was like a synthesis of the two. And boy, the landscape of debate really fucking changed since when I was doing it like over like 10 years ago, like a long, long time ago. It's weird that I'm that old now. But anyway, I really like Lincoln Douglas debate though. And one of the things I would try to show the students is that you can take like a regular, average, everyday back and forth, any average discussion, and you can actually use the framework and the concepts from more formalized debate in it. And once you develop that skill, you start to just kind of naturally use it all the time. Because this is one of the things people criticize people over, right? Or they're very critical of the idea of practicing debate. Because, when are you ever in a formal debate where there's a judge and they're keeping time and you take turns and you have all of your evidence and you lay things out in this very, very ordered, systemized way? That's just not the way that persuasion tends to work. So then the question is, why do debate? Why do debate if it's not going to directly translate? And the answer is it does translate, just kind of indirectly. And when you look at the contrast between informal versus formal debate, you can take the principles of formal debate and then see, oh, this is why in a formal debate you have this thing. Because these are the things that you're going to try to keep out, right? This is the thing that kind of poisons the informal debate, right? And then that poison kind of becomes the body of what you might call sophistry, or like pathos, very persuasion style rhetoric that's not necessarily in good faith, but can regardless be very effective. But anyway, when it comes to the relationship between words and meaning, the easiest way to understand it is that words are tools, right? And if I have a fork and I'm using the fork to eat my cereal, the fork is functioning as a spoon. In that context, I'm using the fork is my spoon in that context specifically. It doesn't mean all forks are spoons, right? But potentially, sure. Potentially, in a certain context, that is what's happening. And you might judge something as good or bad or appropriate or inappropriate based on how well it mimics, that intended function. So we might say a fork is kind of a mediocre spoon at best, but maybe passable depending on what you're doing with it, right? And this is why. Okay, so what I'm going to do is lay out the way Lincoln Douglas debate basically works. You have your affirmative and your negative. You have a resolution, right? And the resolution is a sentence. The affirmative is defending that resolution as true. The negative is attacking the resolution as not true. And the negative, of course, has this advantage where they don't have to necessarily disprove it. They just have to show that the affirmative can't prove it, right? You might take a hard negative stance where you're actually presenting some kind of counter theory that's going to disprove it. But ultimately, if at the end of the debate, it's the affirmative's burden, right? And that's an example of a principle in formal debate and in law, really, that you see kind of echo throughout. Whoever is making the assertion has the burden of proving it, and the negative kind of has this advantage where, like, if it's a tie, the negative wins. And that's true on like the basic level of premises. Now, when we have debates, that's the first thing we have to determine, right? What is the resolution? Or in informal debate, one phrase I like to use is point of departure, which is to say, perhaps we agree on many things, but where's the point where there's a divergence? Where's the point where, we're not getting along, where we have some kind of a dispute? And of course, we all have many points of departure, right? If you take the sets of beliefs between any two people, there's going to be, thousands and thousands of points of departure. And they might be very, very minor and specific, or they might be very, very like all encompassing. And in order to identify that point of departure, you may need to add more and more and more specificity. Now, what you'll find is that when you see a lot of debates, especially informal debates, or like on YouTube where you have this kind of hybrid of formal informal, right? I'm thinking, for example, like of Tree of Logic's debates where there's like an overall kind of veneer or an overall idea of a formal debate, but then in the actual practice of it, it just turns into like a totally informal kind of a thing. It kind of has elements of both. Um, in those informal debates, very often what happens is there's either no clash, or there's no agreement as to what the actual point of departure is. And this is because if you're not clear about the point of departure from the very beginning, then what the debaters are going to find halfway through the discussion is that they actually agree on what they thought was the formal point of departure. And there's a new point of departure, which has this new level of specificity. And now we're not discussing that because we didn't focus on that from the very beginning. You'll find that all the time. That's what happened with Stefan Molyneux when he debated Walter Block on whether or not spanking was consistent with the non-aggression principle. And what ultimately happened is Walter Block was losing the debate, and he redefined the resolution or the point of departure in order to kind of create a new ground for him to exist with his position. That was essentially kind of what happened. So that's the first thing. The first thing is the resolution. And in formal debate, this is done for you, right? Some committee or some whatever organization is running the events, they decide this for you. And then the very next thing you do is, the next thing you do is you have some quote with your speech. You present a value. In Lincoln Douglas, the value is like the thing that you want to achieve. And in Lincoln Douglas, one of the ways you win the debate is by arguing that your value is more important than your opponent's value, right? Like if my value is liberty and their value is something like stupid, I can argue, dude, it doesn't matter what they're saying, what's true, what's not true. I'm the person arguing for liberty. Like if my position holds, right? Like this is why we should, use this or whatever. And it's always something like vague and like abstract. It's always like liberty or truth or equality or something like that. You present a value criterion, which has multiple functions. One is that it is it's the what is required to achieve the value, right? And it can also be seen as a way to weigh competing values. So you set up a criterion, which is something that lets you define the metric by which the value is achieved, so that this very abstract, all-encompassing thing has real, measurable qualities to it. So that structure, that can be a major point of contention. And the thing that's really fun to do is when you look at a debate, rather than just focusing on the arguments and the facts and the points, you can look at, what is this person fighting for? I've had multiple times where I have a back and forth with someone, and ultimately we realize, this person values some principle of maybe like very often what it'll be for me is like I value liberty and like the resolution of conflict and peace and things like that, whereas they might value like what they claim to be social cohesion, right? And that changes the framework of the debate, because although I might contend that valuing liberty and peace and having these libertarian foundations ultimately will lead to social cohesion, that's a very different framework than arguing for liberty just for its own sake, or arguing that violence is bad, aggression is wrong, just for its own sake. That's very different from arguing, here's how we get liberty, and now liberty is going to eventually lead to social cohesion through this thing, right? One is very idealistic, the other is very pragmatic. So that's another thing that's really, really important. And it's actually quite fun. It's fun to look at two sides of a debate, and then rather than thinking about who's factually correct or incorrect, looking at what is the ultimate value that they're trying to achieve, and what is the metric by which they are measuring their having achieved it. So that's the first chunk of it. Now, after you set up this value criterion thing, or maybe before, depending on how you want to write your stupid little speech, you define words. So remember the resolution? The resolution is a specific statement of fact, right? And the affirmative is going to say it's yes, this is true. Negative is going to say not necessarily true. And the reason you need to have a specific sentence is because we need to look at each word, and any word that can be defined multiple ways or might have some level of ambiguity to it, literally you need to define them, and it's very important to. And each side may offer definitions. And then one of the first things you debate is what is the definition of the terms that we are debating. And this ties into my notion of words as tools to convey meaning, because I don't think anybody uses words to always mean the same thing every single time. And I think that that's a ludicrous burden to put on people. So therefore, in the context of a discussion, whether it's a one-on-one discussion or in front of an audience or one person, with many, however it is, whatever it might be, in that context, you need to tailor your use of words. And it's a give and take, it's a back and forth, because the goal isn't to have all of your definitions be used all the time. The goal is to, in that context, determine what is this word going to mean here in this discussion. And this is another way of understanding the idea that words don't inherently have meaning. They're tools for conveying the meaning that's in our head. And we can use a word to mean something in one context and to change it in another. And I get this is like so tiresome for people who already agree with this, but my point is it's a give and take. If I'm having a conversation with somebody who's, for example, the reason this came to mind had to do with somebody posted like a meme in Stefan Molyneux's like Facebook group, and the person said, "Oh, it's about coercive government versus voluntary government." And of course, there was a predictable response, which is, coercive government is an oxymoron, and they're both right. They're both correct, and they agree, but their point of departure, in this case, has to do with the definition of the term government. So I explained that some people use the term government in a broader sense to incorporate all which governs. And this was when I debated Omnizoa. This was like our major contention, our major point of departure that didn't get identified until too late into the debate for it to matter. Because anytime I would say, okay, we'll use this way or that way, that would be grounds for saying, oh, well, now you're not defending anarcho-capitalism anymore or whatever. But basically, the broader sense of it is that if you have a private dispute resolution organization, if you have things like contracts or voluntary law, decentralized versions of law that involve arbitration, things like that, people will say, well, it sounds like you're talking about government. And so many people who are libertarian and voluntarist, since we kind of by default use the understanding of government as meaning the state. And when we say that, we mean a coercive, terroristic monopoly on the use of force and on arbitration. And because of that, anytime we offer what you might call forms of governance or solutions to what government provides, right? So government claims to have solutions to certain problems. If you say we can't have a government, then what are the alternatives, right? If we offer those alternatives, people say, oh, well, that's government. You just recreate a government, you're calling it something else, right? And it trips up the way that we talk about these things. And I think this is an example of how this Lincoln Douglas framework, this more formal debate framework, can actually map onto regular discussion in a way that's very productive. So if you're talking to somebody about we don't need to have a state, we don't need to have government, the first thing you need to do is clarify what do they mean by government? Because a lot of these arguments about how if there's no government, then there's going to be a power vacuum, and therefore you always have government, therefore we need to have some kind of a balance, right? That's usually kind of the statist framework. Basically parsing that out of saying, hey, listen, not all government is coercive, right? Some government is voluntary. That can be an alternative approach that actually is very, very effective. And this is something that could potentially persuade kind of the more minarchist libertarian types, or even potentially the more anarcho-communist types. So that's really important. Personally, I don't. Ideally, if government's going to be a term, it should refer to non-state government. And I would argue that government does not govern in the broader sense of the term, which is to say that it defeats itself. So it's a kind of a weird approach, right? The state is anti-government in that sense. If you value government, you must be an anarchist. If you're not an anarchist, then you are promoting a terroristic monopoly that actually inhibits and destroys government. Do you see how it's retaking the euphemism that's been falsely put onto the state and taking it for yourself, right? Because us anarchists, we've been fighting from a standpoint of having to defend a term that's synonymous with Antifa and bombing people and terrorism, right? And just absolute chaos, right? They say, oh, if you defend any kind of anarchy, that means chaos, because that's what the connotation of the word is. And I'm defending the state, which is government, and the connotation of government is order, right? So that's not my case for that. So I guess I've touched on a lot of things. Just to finish out the video, the Lincoln Douglas framework is you have a resolution, you state if you're affirmative or negative, you define words in the resolution because words do not have inherent meaning. They are tools for conveying the meaning. And it's really important to give your definitions and then to agree on them. If there's no agreement on the words and the definitions, then you have to either create multiple iterations of the word in order to have a way to refer to both definitions, or I guess the debate can't proceed. You have your value and your criterion. And then the last bit of it are your contentions. So the contentions is kind of the last piece. It's the thing that links empirical facts in the world with the resolution and then leads to the value, right? So for example, the resolution is something like the government should not control or regulate any substances, right? Or the government shouldn't, there should be no war on drugs, right? What if that was the resolution? Well, what's war on drugs? Well, it's prohibition. Does it include prohibition, right? Well, how come alcohol does not include? What are substances? Is that food, right? I maintain the term drug is not useful because food is a drug. It's a substance you consume that affects your body, right? There's no useful way to create a definition that includes that which we generally consider to be drugs, just by habit and by use. There's no way to define that category of thing without either being self-referential, which is how I just defined it, which is how you know what I'm referring to. There's no way to define it in that way that doesn't include food. And once you include food, well, what's the fucking point of having a separate term? Anyway, so that's the whole example. So let's say that's a resolution. It has to be the war on drugs, right? And that we should ban it. So the affirmative says we need to get rid of it. We need to end these practices altogether. And then your contentions might be things like, here are the harms of it. And, these harms are relevant because they limit people's freedom, they limit our economy. It's ultimately a detriment, right? So you could make that argument from all kinds of different standpoints. You could say it's an equality issue, even, right? It's like, why are some things banned and not others? This is just a cronyism, essentially, right? And then the negative might have their contentions, right? They might say, things like liberty, the freedom to do whatever, we don't hold to this in principle, and it's not good to. What we should really value is like the health of society, and here's ways that banning these drugs actually reduces that harm, right? That impact. So the contentions are much more empirical, and that's where the debate descends from the clouds down into the earth, and then it takes that empirical fight, and then it recontextualizes it up into the clouds in order to state, what is the point, what is the thing that we're really talking about, or sorry, just to say why it's important. So anyway, that was just a little bit of a rant. I just wanted to kind of throw some of that out there. I know Patricia commented on the video that I should respond to feminist cringe, and I'll do that. I'll make sure I do that. Um, Actually, one topic I wanted to weigh in on was the halftime show pole dancer drama. I don't know if that satisfies the request for responding to feminist cringe, but I want to get that out of the way, and then maybe we'll find another thing to respond to. Anyway, thanks for watching. Have a nice day. Keep it easy.